message. So I would like to call upon Shambhavi, my colleague, who's going to just give us some context behind why we ended up forming this panel and this context in the conversation. Some research findings from our past research work and some additional findings that we've got so far.
I don't know if we're able to share the deck because of our tech issues. It's there? Yeah, okay. So at Ikigai Law, over the past, I would say 3 to 4 years, we have been investigating different aspects of AI and building and deploying responsible AI. And through our work, we've sort of through our work when we applied for our grant originally for this project, we identified issues with implementation and how do you involve lived experiences, in the building and design process of AI. We noticed there were a lot of policy principles coming out. We noticed there was a lot of literature on the harms and risks that AI can pose, especially in sensitive sectors like healthcare. But what was missing was direct playbooks on how do you build responsible and build inclusive AI such that no patient or no end user and end beneficiary is left behind. There was a great need at the time for clarity on how do you, build it out and how do you deploy AI responsibly. So we applied for a grant with the University of Melbourne and the Nalsar University of Law to investigate co-design and participatory design approaches to build inclusive AI. And through our 2-year study nearly, we identified certain practical implementation steps which we have fondly dubbed tenets, and we've identified 8 such tenets. And these tenets can apply across design, deployment, development, monitoring, at any stage of the life cycle of the AI system. And the idea is to stop and sort of ask questions on who are you building the AI for, how will it be deployed, who are the intermediaries in the process of deploying AI and building AI. And this sort of approach allows for iterative refinement of the AI system being built for healthcare. It also ensures that the AI is fit for purpose and that it's culturally responsible. These tenets were co-designed with our experts and cohort members from Australia and India who traveled to both countries and sort of shared expertise from their academic work, from their civil society advocacy, from their industry perspectives on building out AI. And we were fortunate to sort of bring them all together in multiple rooms and multiple meetings to co-create these tenets. How we did it was we sort of thought of from the get-go, what do you need to do to build AI responsibly? We realized that a proactive approach is beneficial to that. So in the context of, say, an AI retinal scanning device, how would you ensure that you incorporate people with low vision and vision impairments in the process of building out AI for retinal scanning? How would you include people of different age groups, different genders, different disease states? How would you incorporate their lived experiences to make sure that the AI is working and detecting diseases that they live with? Once you incorporate their perspectives, where is the AI being used? Is it being used in a rural setting? Is it being used in a big private hospital in a big city where there's no latency in internet connectivity? There's really good backup generators for light and sound, and where are you building and using this AI? Finally, we also realize the value of tailoring risk assessments and qualitative assessments of whether the AI is actually inclusive or not. And this is where our partnership with Dr. Mahima Kalla's center, the Center for Digital Transformation of AI in Healthcare, their work is simulation research. Their work involves a lot of qualitative assessment of AI technologies before they're even deployed. So incorporating such qualitative methods into your process of building and designing AI solutions, how would you do that as well? And so these tenets are applied. They're not steps that you follow as like a checkbox. They are tenets that you can go back to at any point of time in the life cycle of an AI. You could even decide to exclude one of the tenets if it's not fit for the purpose that you're building out the AI for. The idea is to be flexible and open, and the idea is to believe in continuous improvement of AI and to be iterative in your approach. But it's also to ensure that no one is designing AI in a way that leaves anyone behind. So I'll just stop here. This is the context for the conversation. And the panelists that we have here will dive a little bit more deeply into the different aspects of co-design and different ways in which these tenets can be implemented across the globe.
Shambhavi, for the findings. I wanted to just take the opportunity to also introduce our esteemed panelists here today. We've got Dr. Kritika Rangarajan with us, who's an associate professor at AIMS New Delhi. She's a radiologist and a data scientist, and works at the AIMS. We've got Kanika Kalra, who's a technical officer at the AI and Digital Health Division, World Health Organization. We've got Tess Buckley with us, who is a senior program manager who looks at digital ethics and AI safety at Tech UK. For those of you all who may not know what is Tech UK, it's the equivalent of a NASCOM in the United Kingdom. And we've got Mohit Joshi with us, who's a principal researcher at Microsoft India. Sorry, Mohit Jain. Sorry, at Microsoft India. And we've got Aman, who'll be moderating the panel.
Already time?
Yes.
We've not managed to solve the technical.
We'll do it at the end.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that, Rutuja, and thank you all for agreeing to come here and to the wonderful audience which has filled this room. And thank you to Shambhavi for introducing those tenets. I think that since we're at the Impact Summit, I think one way to kind of contextualize this conversation is also that for years now there have been conversations which have felt a little theoretical when it comes to AI and ethics and responsibility. And if you're talking about the impact, let's also talk about the practical challenges or practical techniques to get us there. And I think those tenets speak to really what is it that you need to do. As apart from being a policy organization, we're a law firm, and very often our clients ask us, okay, what do we need to do? And I think real world insights into what others have done very often gives you some of those answers, right? And before I come to you, Kritika, I'll just maybe contextualize this with something I learned in the last 6-8 months with some research that we were doing when we are helping kind of draft a set of actionable advice for AI developers. This is a project we were doing primarily from a data protection lens, but also larger responsible AI principles. And we were talking to the folks at Vadvani AI who building that cough against TB app. And one of the things they told us was along the way, they found that the accuracy of the model was much higher for men than it was for women. And then they had to actually rework that, lost some overall accuracy, but to kind of harmonize the results so that it was fair to people of both genders. And there are these kind of practical trade-offs that one makes as we're thinking about this, right? And so with that framing, Kritika, maybe I'll come to you first. I'd really like us to explore some of the practical realities of inclusive design, right, of AI in healthcare. Could you share some examples of the research and innovation being done at AIMS and how these projects account for known barriers to accessing healthcare, and barriers that we all know of: language, gender, disability, location, digital literacy? There's so many of these barriers that exist, and India is such a great test bed for all the barriers that exist. I'm sure there's a cohort which represents that. So if you could speak a little bit from your experience.
Well, thank you for putting that question across, but also thank you for spotlighting this issue of practicality of AI, really, because I think it's very easy for us to get lost in theory. And I think one of the primary problems, not just of AI but medtech in general, is we tend to begin with the product. We tend to think, okay, this is possible, so let me build out something for this. Only then, 2 years, 3 years down, you're then looking for people who would use it. So, one of our grounding principles has been to invert this question and say, what is missing? What is it that I struggle with today? And what are the ways of solving it? And even if you are an AI researcher, I think, one of our biggest learnings has been keep yourself broad and be open to finding solutions which are outside AI. Sometimes the most, the best solution could be something which is totally non-technological, forget about non-AI. And that might be the cheapest way of doing it. So if you put an AI there, you're complicating it. So I know it's an AI summit, but I think one of the most important learnings for us is, don't always default to AI. Also, the questions that you ask, sometimes are driven by the data that's available. And sometimes the data doesn't often represent some of the most underserved sort of populations, right? It doesn't even represent the most important questions that you want to ask. It's simply that data is available. That means a lot of effort is going in a direction which may not be that beneficial to patients at large. So again, I think if I had to give like a one-word answer, it is begin with patients, put patients at the center of it. Where is it that they are going to benefit? What disease entity do you want to target? But also put providers pretty much at the center, because they're the ones who are going to use it. We've had examples of places where an ASHA worker says, I don't want to use this because it takes away my sense of respect in the community, because suddenly the person in the community thinks that it's the phone which is answering everything and it's not the ASHA worker. We've had Anganwadi workers who say that I don't want to use this because it gives me too many alerts when a patient is a high-risk pregnancy. So things like this come only with your ears to the ground. So again, just a people-first approach, whether it's a provider or a patient.
I understand that you worked on a fair number of projects building technology for people who are differently abled. I think one of the apps that you built is called Sign It, which is specifically for people who are hearing impaired, right? So I'd again love to ask you on what your process has looked like. How do you not just seek feedback, but create that environment for sharing feedback? The ability to kind of do that, and then how do you bring that feedback into the development process, right? So that I'll start with that for you, and then maybe add to this.
Yeah, good question. Yes. So I think I just give you some description of Signet, the specific project that Aman asked about. It is a project wherein we try to create a sort of like a game for deaf and hard of hearing population, so that they can play the game, and while playing the game they also like end up generating data, which is basically sign language data, along with the transcription of that. I think the other thing, I think you asked about the something about like the feedback. So I think we had a very tight feedback loop wherein they would give us some feedback. We would iterate and modify the system or add that feature or remove certain thing, and then we'll show it to them and ask them like explicitly like, hey, you suggested this, we made it this way, and so they also had a skin in the game in that case. So that also helped a lot, and I think yeah, it goes. I think the other way to put it is that like I think a lot of times we don't take that as their expertise. So rather than thinking that we are building for them, I think building with them and thinking that they are the expert. Like you go to you build a healthcare technology, you want to build with a doctor because they are the expert. Similarly, if you are building a tech for a particular demography, then you should build with them because they are the expert. So I think that's the mindset that needs to change in order to build something useful. Yeah, thank you.
So wonderfully framed. You know, rely on that as an expertise in itself. And thank you for sharing that experience, Mohit. Tess, I'll come to you next, and I think what Mohit just said maybe resonated quite strongly with you. I think a lot of your work is around equity and justice, but also on the role that the teams that you build to kind of develop AI solutions have a huge role to play. And I think you mentioned, reflected some of that in their choice of how to bring that feedback in the loop itself. So, I mean, honestly, I would love to hear from you on what your work around in this space has been and your reflections.
Yes, first off, thank you for bringing us together on what I see as such an important topic. So non-negotiable, we know homogenous teams build homogenous systems. We know that diverse teams catch bias early on. But I actually want to respond to this question and take it beyond diversity as a numbers game. I think we need to be considering this as about epistemic diversity. And I'm glad that I kind of get to echo what my other co-panelists said here, right? It's about who is the decision maker. So not just looking at team composition, but who holds power within that team. It's about lived experiences, expertise. So thank you for doing, I don't need to get into that, exactly what you said. And decreasing tokenization, which unfortunately we do see sometimes. Disability is so different in, we could have the same diagnosis, but that manifests in very different lived experiences. And so we need to be thinking about that. I think when we look at the literature and bias across literature, it was great in 2018, we had a lot of focus on sex and race. Important. But I specialize in ableism and biotechnologies, and one of the reasons for that is we're still really lacking in socioeconomic inequality and ableism, or prejudice against people with disability. And for folks in the room that work in healthcare, this becomes so critical for you, because I don't know about you, but if I go to the doctors, it's because I've acquired some kind of disability or difference, or because I'm congenitally born with differences and disabilities. And so it just causes harm at scale. So if you have a biotech or a prognostic tool that is ableist, you will harm the folks that come to your offices to be helped. I think if you'd like to read more about the importance of centering disabled folk in your innovation, I always turn people to something called the curb cut effect. And essentially this is where we look at the motto of the disabled community, which is nothing about us without us, and we credit them for a lot of the innovation that is now mainstreamed. A great example of this is closed captioning. So that was fought for by the deaf community, and guess what? We get to enjoy it when we're in gyms or we're in busy spaces. It's not just a nice thing to do. It is a nice thing to do. It's also a really smart thing to do in your innovation. So I think I would end it by also pointing to the fact that we need to consider the types of data sets we are trying to work with to mitigate bias. And the Royal Society in the UK just released an incredible report which pointed us to functional data sets and small data sets to try and mitigate this bias. Yes, thank you. I'll stop there.
Thanks for that, Tess. And I hadn't heard of the curb cut effect before today, and it's something I'm going to remember and reflect on after this as well. Kanika, for you, I'm going to frame this slightly differently, because the perspective you bring from WHO is going to look at this, I'm sure, slightly differently. The fact that we need to be participatory and do co-design is, I think that's not up for debate anymore. But from the WHO's perspective, how do you incentivize this? How do you create the channels for the adoption of some of these practical tenets that Shambhavi was talking about? How do you make sure they're, something that feeds into projects that you're perhaps funding? Or so how do you kind of define it? How do you create pathways for incentivization? How do you make sure that that's actually happening in a meaningful way?
That's a great question. So when we're working with WHO and when we're working with partners, the thought process that I'm hearing from the panel right now is centered to what we also think of. When we're promoting the creation of a design, it has to be with the people who are affected by the design and with the community that is going to be impacted by this design. We have often come across situations where there is a solution for a problem that does not yet exist, or that was addressed, as Dr. Kritika said, way before with ESA technologies. The process that we've been taking forward is using multi-stakeholder engagements, and especially in AI, a lawyer alone cannot achieve anything, a doctor alone cannot achieve anything. It has to be multi-sector engagement, which we are trying to achieve using the Global Initiative on AI for Health, where we're bringing the International Telecommunications Union, the WHO, of course, and then the World Intellectual Property Organization together. And we have 2 roundtables which completely focus on this topic. But how is it that we're not looking at IP as something that becomes a barrier, or regulation that becomes a barrier towards innovation, but is rather being used to promote and incentivize innovation, but in a very ethical, safe, and effective manner. And this is something that we're doing also through guidance documents that we build and then implement with member states. And these have practical checklists. So much like what we have learned from Project Build, it is essential for there to be practical checklists that can be implemented on ground. We don't want piles of pages put together and then just sitting on the bookshelves catching dust. That is something that we've been actively working towards, and have a very multi-stakeholder environment where we have representation and inclusivity at all levels possible.
Thanks for that, Kanika. I'm now going to maybe switch gears a little. I do want to hear, I mean, we're hoping that the policymakers are listening to us, is one way that I'm thinking about this. So really, just on the basis of your work, what are the lessons, both like from India, from your experiences around the world, and especially in collaborating with industry to build inclusive AI in healthcare, right? How do you embed some of that in the policy making process? And are there policies or practices that you think that we should be importing in from maybe some of the work you've done in other jurisdictions? Ritika, if you could reflect on that.
So I think we've been sort of very lucky in terms of being able to partner with a very wide variety of partners. So we partner with institutions like ISC, IITs, etc. And I think what's interesting there is the focus is very much on how do you build, at the core, very high quality AI, which actually takes, we talk about physics-informed neural networks, but can you actually build a health-informed neural network, a biology-informed neural network? How are you able to take the details of what maybe a radiologist, a medical specialist is actually seeing into the design of the neural network itself? So I think that's one very interesting sort of area of work, and we have very sort of fortunate to have institutions that we partner with over there. And then also, on the other end, industry. So startups, I mean, I think we are very fortunate again to have a very large variety of startups who are very, quick on their feet. So I think what works very well with them is you have a very well-defined problem statement. You want to take that to the ground. I think that, the best way of doing something like that is to partner with a startup. And then on the other hand, industry, large industry, especially when a lot of hardware is involved, a lot of, equipment is involved, or you need a lot of compute, like if it's a foundational model that you're trying to build, then it's incredibly helpful to build with an industry partner. So if that answers some of that, just deciding where in the spectrum, who is the right partner to really collaborate with.
No, that's fantastic. And I think the interesting thing is our government is thinking along many of these lines. I think they just need reinforcement on some and course correction perhaps on others. So I'm glad there is general consensus. Mohit, I'll come to you, because I mean, at the end of the day, you do work with a very large organization, right? It is a very large organization, and it's global, right? And I mean, in the next part of this conversation, I want to talk a little bit about what that means to be global and some of that harmonization. But from your perspective, also just on how do teams collaborate in a global organization where there are different, I mean, you do have your own set of inclusive design principles at Microsoft, right? But I'm sure they're interpreted in different ways in different parts of the world, or not. I mean, I'd love to understand a little bit of that perspective on a large global organization, but how do you see that guidance? How do you adapt them to the context you're working in? Any reflections on that, or has it been smooth sailing, in which case maybe this question is moot?
Yeah, definitely not smooth sailing. I think at the core of most of these responsible AI, I think the principle is that we should. It's about preventing any kind of harm from AI. I think that's sort of like the simplest way to put it. I think the other, the way I think we have been interpreting it more broadly in India specifically, again, it's hard to say because I think every team is, I think most of these are written or prescribed in a manner that it is open to interpretation. So I think in India, or at least in the research lab, the way we are doing it is that apart from responsible AI, that it should definitely not do any kind of harm. I think the other way is also to make it very inclusive AI. So this sort of taking it hand in hand, the benefits of the AI should not be limited to a certain demography, be it social or economical, it should not be limited to that. And hence there is a wide variety of projects that have been focusing on different domains, but that also like across the demography chain as well. So like in education or healthcare or accessibility or agriculture, so that it's not only like a certain sector, but across it. So I think so those are, I would say, the broad interpretation I can point to. Yeah.
Just maybe following up on
Sure.
that, but there's also across the world there are different. Let's just take for example data protection as a legal framework.
Yeah,
They differ so widely.
So widely, yes, yes.
And how do you factor that in? Like, is it? Because I can get away with a lot more in India, I do it, or
No.
I
So
set a
so
global
Microsoft policy is very, very clear there. Again, so I work a lot with the Microsoft has a division called as CELA, CELA, which is the legal entity inside Microsoft. So you need to get their approval for any kind of critical deployments or anywhere where like human is involved. So any kind of human factors, human evaluation, or even or like I work in healthcare, so a lot of, and even with people with disability. So you have to go through the CELA process, and the way they work is that they take the worst case scenario from the two entities. So they have to, like, it's US, because most of these CELA people are living in US, and then they have like a body in India. So based on like the laws in US and in India, they try to take the harshest one possible, basically. Okay, so before, let's say like DPDP was not there, then the GDPR equivalent of what was there in US, that was being followed. But now, like now DPDP is there, so they learn about DPDP and GDPR and whatever like equivalent there in other markets. They say like, okay, out of this combination, which is like the common things are taken, but like if there are like two things which are conflicting, the harshest one is taken and applied so that they are doing justice to it. Yeah.
Thanks. I was curious personally about that one, so I'm glad I got that answered. Tess, for you, I know there's a lot of work that the UK has been doing to drive AI assurance. If you could help unpack what that means for this room, and also some insights on how companies are actually approaching building AI tools that are fit for purpose, especially to include vulnerable communities, right? So if you could reflect on that for us.
Happy to. AI assurance is my absolute favorite thing. It is the means, or how DSIT really defines it. Our government is about how we evaluate, measure, and communicate ways that we mitigate risks in emerging tech, in this case AI. Another way to understand it is regulation kind of talks about what is responsible AI. And AI assurance is how we actually do that. So for instance, we might hold the principle of transparency, the ethical principle. And that sounds really nice, but in order to do that, we do the assurance technique or tool of a system model card, which is like a nutrition label, but for the system, right? And within the UK context, this is a real economic and policy priority for us. In a DSIT report called Reassuring the Future of Responsible AI, this space actually already employs 12,000 folks. It's been quoted worth 1.6 billion and set to grow 6 times over the next decade if we address barriers to this space. So, you know, that then was followed by something called the Trusted Third-Party Roadmap. And in this, there was 4 key areas that our government is focusing on, and I think, you know, assurance in other areas should as well. It's a challenge for responsible AI practitioners, AI auditors, folks that are trying to stress test these systems, information and data access, the skills and competency framework for that profession itself, and actually money towards innovation and novel approaches of assurance. And then DSIT is also getting together something called a consortium. So they're taking together folks that are the responsible AI lead at Microsoft or other larger companies and smaller companies as well, and they're kind of bringing them together. In terms of my research itself, and the UK is taking a sector-specific regulatory approach, and that, as our AI assurance ecosystem is maturing, is getting echoed. So we're starting to see, specifically in public sector, a real appetite for AI assurance. You don't have to talk about buy-in because, for instance, in healthcare, you guys are pretty mature on it. So is financial services, so is justice emergency services, because you have bioethics, because you have a duty of care, because you have the Hippocratic Oath. And I think that's really kind of helpful for cross-sector learning as well, so bringing along other spaces. And finally, key to the AI assurance ecosystem, and something I think we all need to work on a bit more, we talk a lot about skills. Skills are important. You know, let's talk about the talent pipeline, yes, for technical folk, for founder folk, but also for the human infrastructure that allows us to bring these ethical principles to life. And what I mean is again, AI assurance firms, the responsible AI lead. And so this report really looked at the fact that these people come from very different backgrounds, very interdisciplinary, but they're both a mix of kind of legal, technical, philosophy, ethics, and they're really good at translating across incentive structures and communicating within teams. So hopefully that paints a bit of a picture of like the UK's AI assurance ecosystem, which we are leading in, but also ways that we can kind of build it and create more momentum for it, which I would love.
We'll get to that, right, on how to keep this momentum going. I don't want this conversation to end at this panel. Kanika, again, I mean, you look at, I mean, the WHO will look at this from a slightly more global perspective. We heard from Tess on their work on the AI assurance side, but are there, like, to your mind, examples of policies in other countries that, according to you, show promise or are effective at driving digital health equity? Like, any notable examples? Because you're looking at this from a, a much more global perspective.
I love that question because it also gives me an opportunity to reflect on the work that I'm recently wrapping up. As a part of the Regulatory Considerations Working Group, we have a landscape analysis that we're doing, and we've covered about a population percentage of 95% in terms of country valuations. What we have learned in this process is that there are certain countries, such as the US, where, well, there's US, there's of course the EU AI Act, there are horizontal approaches, there are vertical approaches, there are sectoral-based approaches, and then you'll see in some countries where there are state-based laws, in some countries there are federal laws. What we need is alignment in all of this. What we're learning is that we've made mistakes in past where in different sectors, manufacturers have had troubles with entering new markets. Even though the protocol was quite similar, the taxonomy wasn't, and the compliance mechanisms were quite different. This is what the landscape analysis so far has taught us. There has to be, harmonization is a dangerous word. Alignment is not. There has to be some sort of an alignment between the different laws and policies that different countries have, because by the end of it, we have to remember that AI is cross-border by default, and we have to make sure that there is fairness and trustworthy AI throughout. We cannot risk fragmentation another time, and we cannot have inequities rooting out of AI systems at this time, especially in the health sector, where opportunities are endless.
Oh, no. Thank you so much for that. And I mean, the next theme I wanted to talk about was on this conversation around harmonization, but since you've said it's a dangerous word, I'll reframe it as an alignment issue. And I mean, it is important that we have this conversation sitting here in India, but we are trying to also, see what we can do for the world at large. This summit is not meant to be a conversation within India for India or any of that. It is a larger conversation on what the globe needs to do as we step forward, and it just so happens that this conversation is physically located here. So, I mean, Kritika, if I could come to you, I mean, do you have ideas on what institutions like AIMS and the CEO you've been working with, how would you participate in this call for alignment or knowledge sharing to achieve some of this harmonization, whether it's on policies or even on the principles of inclusive AI in healthcare?
No, absolutely. So I think the project build that we started off with, I think, is an excellent example to allude to.
I didn't prompt this answer. That clear.
Yeah, I will attest to that. So I think that's just a great example of how we do need to come together. Healthcare by nature, and I think you put it very well, is cross-border. So it's every region has its own eccentricity, if I might call it that. But broadly, people across the world, you're human beings at the end of the day, and everyone faces the same set of difficulties, same set of diseases, and it has to, AI built in one place typically broadly works in most other places, while you need to sort of customize it to that particular place. So some of the examples of what we've been trying to do is try to get a federated learning sort of system where while you can't share data, the model can go. So the model kind of travels across the globe to different centers and gets trained on that particular data, so that it kind of has seen the variety overall, but also sort of is specialized to deal with that particular problem. Similarly, I think language is another sort of area where it really helps to understand how everybody has dealt with a certain thing, because broadly again, while conversations might allude to the same thing, the method of expression of diseases changes very much. Like, you would hardly ever see a patient walk into AIMS and say, I have right upper quadrant pain. Whereas, that's how textbooks really describe it. The person it's very culturally rooted. The way the person expresses symptoms, is probably going to be ghabrahat ho rahi hai. And then you have to figure out what that really means. So while your model per se is actually capturing essentially medical textbook sort of language, which is essential, but then it's also essential to sort of capture the geographical variation, the cultural variation. And yeah, I mean, I think that's how learning and also learning, right? Just simply learning from each other's experience can move you months ahead, because you don't want to start repeating the same mistakes that somebody else did. So I think that's in short, what we've learned across the globe.
I mean, absolutely fantastic examples. Does everyone agree though with Kritika? Okay, just checking. I just want to make sure. Mohit, I mean, I'll come to you again. And again, this has to do with the fact that, big company across the world. How can research teams like yours also? I mean, I also want to understand how this kind of dynamic plays out in a large organization. On how do you share insights based on the design and evaluation process, how do you share that with your global colleagues? And I mean, what is the role that a shared language could perhaps play, or is there one already, or is there more to be done? I want to know a little bit from your experience as well.
So how do we share our learning or our finding? I think as a researcher, I think the easiest way to do that is by writing research papers, whom not a lot of people read. But at the end of it, to my surprise as well, sometimes some papers do get noticed by the right community. Okay, and they do wonders. Okay, I'll just give you an example. I'm actually very, very proud of this work. So I think, and this also, like a doctor is here on the panel, so maybe I think she can appreciate it slightly. But so before this LLM boom, I used to work mainly on smartphone-based diagnostic solution, and basically like add some kind of hardware on the smartphone to make it a medical device, in short. Okay. And we work very closely with this hospital in Bangalore called as Sankara Eye Hospital. And we worked with them to build a smartphone-based corneal topographer. Basically, it takes a photograph of your cornea, basically your eye, and gives you a topography of it. And that topography is being used to diagnose a disease called as keratoconus. Okay, a lot of technical jargon, but it is a corneal disease that leads to majority of blindness in the among the teenagers in India. So we built that, and like as a researcher, we built a prototype, we did some clinical evaluation in the hospital, we published a paper in a very computer science journal, and we thought that's the end of it. Somehow, somewhere, some ophthalmologist came across that, and they wrote us an email that like, oh, this is excellent, we want this, and this is what we are looking for, like a handheld device, because because they were in Morocco, so they wrote to us. But then, like over the next few months, like we kept on getting such emails from not only I would say global south, like not only from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and like other countries, but even like a lot of emails from even profs from Stanford, Duke, like UCSF, like, and even more recent, like even last week I got an email from Hopkins. So we landed into something which was, I think, the need of the hour for a lot of these ophthalmologists. And however, it was completely like we didn't intended to make a big splash of it. We just and because Microsoft is not into medical devices, we open source everything, like the hardware, software, all the code, all the image processing, and the AI pipelines. Everything is open source. Long story short is that like means I think very roundabout way of saying it, but I think even research papers can do wonders. at times. Again, like take it with a pinch of salt. But like in my whatever 10, 15 years of research experience, that was the only paper wherein, and the fun fact is that the citation count of that paper is abysmal. Like it's not even 20 citations, but somehow the impact of that is humongous. Like so. Again, like just addition to that story is that because everything was open source, so a bunch of organizations start to use that hardware software to build a medical device. And finally, last year, there is a device launch called as InstaKC, which is built on our platform, and that is now a medical device launched in India and US, which has gone through the regulatory approval by an organization called as Remedio. So we are not directly working with them, but they took our code, they learned from it, and then they adapted it. And now we came to know there are like 2, 3 more such organizations who are actually trying to do the same. So, yeah, yeah, thank you.
It was not a roundabout way. I think that was probably the most delightful answer we could have gotten to that question. One, research papers, please. I think it's so for this audience just to know that you might not be cited, but someone's reading, and you never know what it could be. And the fact that that something that you open source and put out in the world is now being built on by others, I think, and truly globally. I could not have asked for a better example. So thank you for that, Mohit. Tess, I mean, you do represent at the end of the day Tech UK, which we know is an industry association of sorts. And I know, I'm sure there are people in the room here who are curious about what opportunities exist for them within the UK. So what according to you are, we know that there is collaboration happening in these markets. A few years ago, Rutuja and I led a cohort of experts to go to the UK to talk about regulatory approaches to AI in healthcare, and that resulted in Cure AI, working more closely with the NHS, and we saw that happen as a result of some of the work we did, and incredibly proud of that. But for the audience in the room, what are some of, are there bilateral partnerships happening in this space? And especially from this perspective of enabling equity, right? Could you speak a little bit about that opportunity between the two nations and maybe more globally as well?
Yeah, happy to. I think I would just affirm that we are always really excited to work with India. You guys are 39th in the Global Innovation Index. You're 6th when it comes to IP, and you're 3rd when it comes to startups. And so our members are always looking for that kind of conversation. We actually have a dedicated forum to UK and India, and our healthcare team is one of the largest in the organization. I think there's like 4 folks at least just on that. We usually ride solo. And so, but I think we also need to be frank, or I'll be frank, in the fact that when it comes to collaboration, it's a bit patchy. And I think a reason why for our members is around the data localization laws, and just justifying kind of how that might be a bit more costly in the kind of contracts that they are trying to work through. And so
learning, she gave us the answer already.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Please put it in place, because I think that friction is real, and it is dampening the really dynamic bilateral relation that we have. So I think that's the biggest feedback that I hear. We have a lot of great building blocks, and for that I'm excited because it's my first time in India and I've absolutely loved it. So I want to keep coming back. Obviously we have the TSI, and when I was reading through that, I was super excited that number 6 of the 7 pillars was dedicated to biotech. I've been pulled into a lot of conversations with organoid intelligence as of late as well, the frontier. When I look back at some of the things that have worked, and the UK is kind of talking about doing more of, is accelerator programs. So having folks come over and taking them across the nations and regions, so 5 kind of key cities, and connecting them directly with the NHS. I think that multi-stakeholder and great engagement has proven really useful, and DCIT is talking about just continuing with that. Market access. Also still doing a deeper read of the India-UK visions for 2035. It was nice that both of our prime ministers endorsed that. I think as it was welcomed, we still need to kind of keep it at pace and make sure it's delivered. And so still work to be done there. When it comes to kind of equitability and the importance of that kind of programming, the best one, and apologies, it's just closed, but depending on the success, it's the first time they're running it, they might do it again. It was focused on taking women leadership in biotechnologies from Bangalore and Chennai. Chennai, over to the UK, and again, doing that kind of cross-region relationship building. And I think that's something that I'm personally going to be pushing for more of on the ground, because in that programming, I guess what I see is it moves beyond the market access, and it looks a lot more about who gets to benefit from this existing bilateral relationship. I think the final thing I'd flag that perhaps we could be doing a bit more of, I work a lot with the government digital services and ICO, which is our kind of information regulator. And I've seen a lot of good work coming out around privacy enhancing technologies and that for anonymizing data. And perhaps that's something that we can discuss after the session. And I think I just want to echo what you were saying is just because we could doesn't mean we should when it comes to AI. And so I love also having conversations here and identifying what the actual problem is, and is AI the right solution. So also going back from that.
No, good way to kind of call back to that where we started this
conversation
from. And just on that note, Kanika, I think you were the one who kind of flagged some of the challenges your research has identified on the harmonization question, right? But if the solutioning were left up to you, how would you approach it? Or if you were calling the shots at WHO, which you were certainly influencing, so how would you go about it?
I love the way you proposed that question. A number of countries have actually come to us saying that, hey, we do not have the right kind of regulatory mechanism or the right kind of laws to really govern this space. And we don't want to be left in a disadvantageous position just because we don't have the frameworks that are required to have these excellent technologies on ground. Based on which we came out with legal considerations that are essential, that sort of set out the baseline for what is the bare minimum that we need to have in terms of alignment. One of which was having a proper taxonomy that is harmonized in ways across countries. This could include how we define risk-based classification, how do we benchmark technologies, what is it that we mean when we say registry of technologies, what is the post-market surveillance, how are we doing the evaluations, are we being honest when we're doing the evaluations and not restricting it just to clinical evaluations, but understanding, are they sustainable, are they scalable, are they implementable, do they have a future, are we reinventing the wheel? And these are all the things that we're trying to, I completely resonate with all my colleagues and my panelists here. I think we mutually agree. The idea is not to create and recreate technologies, but to have, to start with what we have at the moment and build over it. There is no point reinventing, and that is what WHO really vouches for, and that is what we're trying to achieve. But yeah, coming back to what you said, there has to be alignment in terms of taxonomy. There has to be a mutual understanding of what that is risk-based classification.
Lovely, thanks. Thank you for that, Kanika. Rutuja, how are we doing for time? We have time. So, I mean, I would love to actually throw this open to the audience here. If you could just introduce yourself and who the question is for, or if it's for everyone here.
I have a question from Mohit. My name is Uday Mehta, and I run a foundation called Siddha Divyang Foundation, who happen to be my special son, who is no more. And we work with the Public Health Department, Government of Maharashtra, UNICEF, and the KM Hospital in Pune. Mohit, you mentioned something about the hearing app in the early part of your presentation, because we are finding a lot of issues with the young newborn babies or the babies up to the age of 2 or 3 years having some kind of a hearing impairment. Could you a little bit tell more about it, or can it be possible to know more later on?
Okay, I think there was some miscommunication. So I'm not working on any hearing app for, yeah, this was an app to, sort of like a game for deaf and hard of hearing populations. It was a game built for them. And the idea was twofold. One is that they will have some game, some fun, which is only for that community. Okay, so that was one. Another was that that game will also help to collect data for the community for building sign language models that can be used again to uplift the community further. So that was the broad idea. It has nothing to do with diagnostic part of deafness or hard of hearing. No, yeah, nothing on that side. Yes. Yeah.
Hey, my name is Priya. I am a founder, health tech startup founder. My question is for Dr. Kritika. So my question is, you talked about model traveling boundaries without the patient data. Now, let's say the models coming up from Claude, Google, OpenAI that are HIPAA compliant. Now, to train or to fine-tune even these models on Indian data sets, what we require is, first of all, hospitals like AIMS need to come up and then they need to make some data sets at least publicly available. And then collaboration with respect to government hospitals, private hospitals. And it's very difficult as a founder to, reach out and then actually it's like a practical problem that collaboration is completely missing, at least when you turn the tables here. So what we can do better in terms of like how should we collaborate?
No, absolutely hear you, and I think I'll invert that to what we can do better. So I'll just tell you some examples of what we've been doing. So a lot of our data, I won't say a lot, but then we've made a start in releasing some data publicly. So if you go to the DBT website called IBIA, we're building out something like a Kaggle for medical data sets. So this is the imaging biobank, basically. So there is a genomic biobank as well as an imaging biobank. And AIMS has already released some data, including some of my own work on mammography on IBIA. Another site that you can visit is an ICMR-led effort called MIDAS. So this is by ICMR and IISc, Art Park IISc. So there also there are gold standard data sets is what they call it, because we're also trying to benchmark data sets. So not only just put up the data sets, but also benchmark them and also define what is a good taxonomy for it, basically, because every disease has a very complex taxonomy. So can we break that down and give you some more information and insight into what is it that you should be detecting? So that's the effort from ICMR. And then there is also the AI Kosh. So we are releasing data onto all three of these very early when you compare it with the effort that's going on in several other countries, but we're trying to get there. It's just that there are a lot of more layers to unpack, and we're trying to unpack those layers. And hopefully, because we've done the initial sort of groundwork, hopefully we should be faster when we get further into it. Similarly, we're trying to organize some sort of Kaggle type of contests. Again, METI is really supporting some of those. ANRF is supporting some of those, and you'll see some of those coming up in the very near future. And we're trying to also incubate. So the CMIE is an incubator. It's a bioincubator located within AIMS. So please do reach out if you want to incubate within AIMS. It makes it easy from an ethical perspective to share data with, to even if it is a startup within AIMS. Because even on our side, the overheads of sharing data outside are much higher. You have to take care of patient privacy, patient security, of just annotating this data, which is a huge effort. So this, just some effort in that.
Sure, I'll reach out to you specifically after this conversation.
No, I think there's one more question at the back if we have the time for it. Rutuja, you're keeping me honest on time.
This is the last question, and then we have a video.
Okay.
Hi, good evening, ma'am. Sorry, my question is also to Dr. Kritika. Sorry, I'll have to give a bit of a background why this question is coming through. Your point about what you said about that ASHA worker really hit home for me, because in 18-19 we had developed a high-risk pregnancy app where we had put in machine learning. It was in Himachal Pradesh, and this actually kind of hit. That is it me who's doing it, or is it the machine that's doing it? They really hated that concept. And that kind of carries forward to doctors as well, because that thing is running at the back of the head that AI is going to take over my job. So I'm coming from a place where I would want to learn, because clearly you have a lot of experience and that insight. How do you think we mitigate this challenge? Because the answer is not no AI here. As we realized when we deployed it, we did have an amazing result in infant mortality and maternal mortality, a gross reduction. And there's only so much we can upskill our ASHA and A&M workers, or even the doctors, with all due respect. So from a doctor to a doctor, how do we tell a doctor that, look, you gotta use AI and it's not going to replace you?
I'll say, how do you enter an airport? I think I see more and more people actually adopting DigiYatra, right? And the reason we do that is because it's just so easy to get in. So I think the answer is also there. I think we have to make it very easy to adopt, so that's so easy that it is stupid to do it without that. I mean, and I think till we get there, you can't force anybody to do anything, especially in a system which is so overburdened like the Indian healthcare system. So if you had to tell me that today I have 200 patients to see in my OPD, but I have to learn this skill and do it this certain way, I will not do it. So you have to show me why it makes my life easier. So I think, I think that's where we'll find our answer.
Can I add something to the question? See, we're working on that particular thing with one project, Vatsalya, with the government of Maharashtra, as I indicated. The real problem is the health of the child, and it's not the ASA worker or the Anganwadi worker who is worried about it. It's the mother who's really worried about it,
Yeah.
because mother is with the baby for 24/7.
Yeah.
So we can use AI to reach to the mother with a voice-activated app, with a back-end database, and that breaks down the barrier, because mother is with the baby all the time. So I think that's the answer lies. We must reach to the mother with the responsibility.
Keep the person, you're targeting in
Sorry,
the.
we won't be able to take that last question. I think we're at time. Thank you all for such a wonderful conversation. I think everyone brought such a unique perspective to the conversation here, and my job was very easy. I had a great time listening to you. Uh, yes. So if you could just stay in your seats, there's an important partner who's kind of made this project possible, who unfortunately haven't been able to join us. So we're presenting a short video to include them in this conversation.
Just a message from them and the kind of work they do, just to give you some context of some real life practical labs in a university.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Mahima Khala and I'm a digital health equity and participatory design researcher at the Center for Digital Transformation of Health within the University of Melbourne. I want to extend a very warm welcome on behalf of our center to all the panelists and attendees at this very timely discussion on global cooperation for equitable access to healthcare AI. I would like to start by sharing a little bit about our digital health lab called the Validatron. The Validatron was established to address a persistent global challenge. While interest in digital health technologies, including clinical AI, is growing rapidly around the world, very few solutions actually successfully translate into routine care. And even when they do, they can sometimes unintentionally harm or exclude certain populations, some of whom may already be marginalized. A key aspect of our approach is the use of immersive simulation-based research to identify and address potential issues which may cause clinical AI solutions to fail during real-world implementation. Simulation is enabled through our clinical simulation facility, which has a suite of themed home, primary, and secondary care spaces where patients and clinicians come together to co-design and test tools in a realistic but controlled environment. On top of that, we also have a sandbox where we can use digital tools to build a replica of a health information ecosystem based on interoperability standards. Through simulation-based research, we are able to identify and quickly address in a preclinical setting technical workflow and equity risks, for example, barriers related to digital literacy, usability, cultural context, and language, thereby generating evidence which supports more inclusive and responsible implementation of clinical AI. I'm also very pleased to say that the Validatron's collaboration with Ikigai Law has grown from strength to strength over these past 2 years. It's very much a testament to our shared commitment to advancing inclusive and equitable AI in healthcare. I'm very much looking forward to continuing this journey with you and fostering multilateral collaboration on equitable digital futures for all of us. I'm sorry that I couldn't be present in person today, but I look forward to hearing this insightful panel discussion via live stream. I thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you for. Oh, right. Yeah, actually, she wasn't before, so now that she is, I'm glad that this happened much later. But thank you so much, everybody, for being a wonderful audience and for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't take the last one, but you can definitely catch the panelists after this session. We wanted to just give you a quick memento from the ministry. I have to give it. Okay, sorry. happy day one to all of you all, I guess.